My husband's female best friend set me up. Her family spent hours telling me she should have married him while he did nothing. She never thought I'd be sitting here questioning my entire marriage, but after what happened 3 weeks ago, I can't stop replaying every interaction, every sideways glance, and every uncomfortable moment I'd previously brushed off as my own insecurity. My husband's female best friend orchestrated the most humiliating experience of my life, and the worst part is that he just sat there and let it happen. I'm still trying to process whether our marriage can survive this betrayal, so let me tell you the whole story and maybe you can help me figure out what to do next. My husband Jake and I have been married for 2 years, together for 4. When we first started dating, he was completely upfront about his friendship with Emma. They'd known each other since college, had briefly dated for about 3 months during their junior year, but remained close friends afterward. Jake always insisted that their romantic relationship had been a mistake, that they worked much better as friends, and that there were absolutely no lingering feelings between them. I believed him because he seemed so genuine about it, and honestly, Emma was always perfectly pleasant to me whenever we interacted. Emma is a freelance photographer, specializing in portrait and lifestyle photography. She's genuinely talented, with a growing social media following and several high-profile clients. She's also undeniably beautiful in that effortless, artistic way that makes everyone around her feel slightly inadequate. She has this long, wavy auburn hair, these striking green eyes, and she always dresses in this perfectly curated bohemian style that looks expensive but casual. I'd be lying if I said I never felt a little intimidated by her, but I tried my best to be friendly and supportive of their friendship. The 3 of us would hang out together fairly regularly. Emma would join us for dinner parties, game nights, and group outings with our other friends. She seemed to make an effort to include me in conversations and never did anything overtly inappropriate or disrespectful. Sure, she and Jake had inside jokes from college that I didn't understand, and sometimes they'd reminisce about shared memories that predated me, but that seemed normal for old friends. I pushed down any uncomfortable feelings and told myself I was being paranoid or jealous for no good reason. About 2 months ago, Emma approached me with what seemed like an incredible opportunity. She explained that she was working on a new photography series focused on authentic beauty and wanted to feature real women instead of professional models. She said she'd been watching my social media posts and was impressed by my natural look and the way I carried myself. She asked if I'd be interested in participating in the project, explaining that it would involve a full-day photo shoot at her family's property outside the city, followed by dinner with her family who were visiting from out of state. I was honestly flattered and excited. I'd never done any kind of professional photography before, and the idea of being part of an artistic project sounded amazing. Jake was enthusiastic about it too, saying it would be great exposure for me and that Emma was incredibly professional. He offered to come along to support me, which Emma quickly agreed to, saying it would be fun to have him there and that her family was excited to meet both of us properly. The day of the shoot started off beautifully. Emma's family property was this gorgeous old farmhouse with rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and perfect natural lighting everywhere. Emma had set up various shooting locations around the property, and she began the session with some individual portraits of me in different outfits and settings. She was incredibly professional, giving me clear direction, making me feel comfortable and confident, and capturing some genuinely beautiful shots that I was excited to see edited. Jake was there initially, watching and occasionally helping Emma adjust equipment or suggesting different angles. Everything felt normal and fun for the first hour or so. Then Emma's family started arriving for what was supposed to be a casual dinner after the photo session. Her parents drove up from 2 states away, followed by her older brother and his wife, and finally her younger sister who had flown in from California. Emma had mentioned they were having a family reunion of sorts, and I was touched that she wanted Jake and me to be included, but something shifted the moment Emma's family gathered together. It started subtle enough that I initially dismissed it as my imagination. Emma's mother, Patricia, made a comment about how Emma had such an eye for beautiful subjects while looking meaningfully between Emma and Jake. Emma's father mentioned how proud he was of Emma's photography career and how she deserved to have someone who truly appreciated her artistic vision. These comments felt slightly odd, but not necessarily inappropriate. Then Emma suggested we take some photos of her and Jake together, explaining that she wanted to document their long friendship as part of her project. She positioned them under this massive oak tree with golden hour lighting filtering through the branches. I watched through the camera as she directed Jake to put his arm around her, to look at her instead of the camera, to laugh at something she whispered in his ear. The photos were undeniably beautiful, and they looked incredibly natural and comfortable together in a way that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. Emma's sister Claire was watching too, and she made this comment about how they looked just like they did in college and how some things never change. When I asked what she meant, Claire launched into this story about visiting Emma at school and meeting all her friends, including Jake. She talked about how everyone on campus assumed they were the perfect couple, how they just fit together in this obvious way, and how surprised everyone was when they broke up. That's when Emma's mother chimed in with her own memories of meeting Jake years ago when he and Emma had briefly dated. She went on and on about what a wonderful young man he was, how respectful and charming he'd been, how much the whole family had adored him immediately. She said something about how rare it was to find someone who truly understood and appreciated Emma's creative spirit and complex personality. I started feeling increasingly uncomfortable, but I tried to play it off as casual conversation. After all, these people had known Jake during a different period of his life, so of course they'd have opinions and memories about his relationship with Emma. But then Emma's brother David started talking about how he'd always thought Emma and Jake were meant to be together and how their breakup had been such a shame because they were obviously soulmates. Jake was sitting right there during all of this, and I kept waiting for him to change the subject or redirect the conversation in a way that included me or acknowledged our marriage. Instead, he just smiled and laughed along with their reminiscing, occasionally adding his own memories about college or making jokes about how young and stupid they'd all been back then. He seemed completely comfortable with the direction of the conversation, even when it became increasingly focused on his and Emma's past relationship. Emma's father started telling this long story about a weekend when Jake had visited Emma's family. During college, he described how Jake had helped him fix the roof, how they'd stayed up late talking about literature and philosophy, how impressed he'd been with Jake's character and intellect. He concluded by saying something like, "You know, I always told Emma she'd be crazy to let a man like that get away. Some people just belong together, you know?" At this point, I was feeling genuinely distressed, but I didn't know how to address it without seeming petty or jealous. These were Emma's family members expressing their opinions about events that had happened years before Jake and I even met. Technically, they weren't saying anything inappropriate about our current marriage, but the subtext was becoming impossible to ignore, and Jake's continued silence was making me feel increasingly isolated and uncomfortable. Then Emma suggested we move inside for dinner, and that's when things became truly unbearable. The dining room was set up beautifully, with candles and fresh flowers, but I noticed immediately that Emma had seated herself directly across from Jake, with me positioned at the end of the table somewhat separated from their main conversation. Throughout dinner, the family continued their trip down memory lane, with story after story about Jake and Emma's college relationship and friendship. Emma's mother talked about how Emma had been absolutely glowing during the few months she and Jake had dated, how she'd never seen her daughter so happy and confident. Claire mentioned that Emma had called her crying when she and Jake broke up, saying she thought she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. David brought up how all of Emma's subsequent boyfriends had been compared to Jake, and how none of them had ever measured up in the family's opinion. Emma herself was actively participating in these conversations, laughing about their old inside jokes, sharing intimate details about their past relationship that made me increasingly uncomfortable. She talked about how Jake used to write her poetry, how he was the only boyfriend who had ever truly understood her photography, how he used to spend hours helping her develop film in the darkroom. She described their relationship in these glowing, romantic terms that made it sound like the love story of the century. The worst part was watching Jake's reactions to all of this. He wasn't uncomfortable or trying to redirect the conversation away from their past romance. Instead, he seemed nostalgic and pleased by all the positive attention and memories. He was smiling, laughing, and actively engaging with stories about their relationship. He even corrected Emma on some details about their time together, showing that these weren't just casual memories but experiences he still thought about and remembered vividly. I tried multiple times to steer the conversation toward other topics. I asked about Emma's current photography projects, inquired about her family's work and interests, and attempted to share some stories about Jake's and my relationship. But every conversational thread somehow wound its way back to Jake and Emma's history together. When I mentioned our recent anniversary trip, Emma's mother responded by asking if Jake still remembered Emma's birthday every year like he used to. When I talked about a hobby Jake and I shared, David mentioned how Jake and Emma used to do that same activity together in college. About 2 hours into this dinner from hell, Emma's father made a comment that finally broke me. He was slightly drunk by this point, and he looked directly at Jake and said, "You know, son, I never did understand why you two broke up. Emma always said it was about timing and wanting to focus on your careers, but watching you two together tonight, it's clear you still have that special connection. Some couples are just meant to find their way back to each other eventually." Jake actually blushed at this comment and glanced at Emma with this soft, nostalgic expression that felt like a knife in my heart. Emma looked back at him with the same expression, and for a moment, it was like I wasn't even in the room. The entire family was watching this exchange with approval and satisfaction, as if they were witnessing some kind of romantic reunion. That's when I realized this entire day had been orchestrated. The photography session had been real, but it was clearly secondary to the main purpose of this gathering. Emma had arranged this weekend as an opportunity for her family to spend time with Jake, to reminisce about their relationship, and to essentially audition him as a potential partner for Emma again. The whole thing was a setup designed to make me feel like an outsider and to rekindle whatever feelings Jake and Emma might still have for each other. I excused myself to the bathroom and spent several minutes trying to compose myself and figure out how to handle the situation. I considered asking Jake to leave with me immediately, but I didn't want to cause a scene or give Emma's family more ammunition to use against me. I also wasn't entirely sure how Jake would react if I forced him to choose between staying and leaving with me. When I returned to the table, the conversation had somehow become even more inappropriate. Emma's mother was showing Jake photo albums from Emma's college years, including pictures of the two of them together. She was pointing out specific photos and talking about how adorable they were as a couple, how perfect they looked together, and how much the whole family had loved seeing Emma so happy during that time. Claire had moved to sit closer to Jake and was asking him detailed questions about his current life and career. But instead of asking about our marriage or our shared experiences, she was comparing everything to how things used to be when he was with Emma. She asked if he still read the same authors Emma had introduced him to, if he still listened to the music they used to share, if he still remembered all their inside jokes and shared experiences. Emma herself had become increasingly flirtatious as the evening progressed. She was touching Jake's arm when she talked to him, laughing at everything he said, and making intense eye contact that seemed far too intimate for someone who was supposedly just a friend. She kept bringing up specific memories of their romantic relationship, describing them in detail that seemed designed to make both Jake and her family remember why they had thought Jake and Emma were such a perfect match. The final straw came when Emma's father raised his glass for a toast. I expected something generic about family and friendship, but instead he said, "To Emma and Jake, who have maintained such a beautiful friendship over all these years, and to the possibility that some of the best love stories take time to unfold properly." Everyone at the table raised their glasses enthusiastically, including Jake, who seemed completely oblivious to how inappropriate and hurtful this toast was to me. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly and announced that I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave immediately. I didn't wait for Jake's response or make polite goodbyes to Emma's family. I just walked out to our car and sat there waiting for him to follow me. It took him almost 10 minutes to come outside, and when he finally did, he seemed annoyed that I had left so abruptly rather than concerned about why I was upset. The car ride home was tense and largely silent. Jake kept asking me what was wrong, saying he didn't understand why I was being dramatic about a perfectly pleasant dinner with Emma's family. When I tried to explain how inappropriate and hurtful the entire evening had been, he dismissed my concerns as jealousy and insisted that Emma's family was just being friendly and nostalgic. He claimed he hadn't noticed anything inappropriate about their comments and said I was reading too much into innocent conversation. When I pointed out specific things that had been said, he had explanations for all of them. Emma's father was just drunk and talking nonsense. Her mother was being typically emotional about her daughter's past relationships. The whole family was just being welcoming and trying to make conversation with someone they barely knew. What hurt the most was Jake's complete inability or unwillingness to understand why their behavior had been so hurtful to me. He seemed genuinely confused about why I wouldn't want to spend hours listening to his ex-girlfriend's family talk about how perfect they were together. He acted like I was being unreasonable for expecting him to defend our marriage or redirect conversations that were making me uncomfortable. Over the past 3 weeks, I've been trying to process what happened and figure out how to move forward. I've replayed the entire evening countless times, wondering if I overreacted or misinterpreted innocent comments. But the more I think about it, the more convinced I am that the whole thing was deliberately orchestrated to humiliate me and to test whether Jake still had feelings for Emma. I've also been paying more attention to Jake's ongoing friendship with Emma, and I'm seeing things that I previously overlooked or rationalized away. They text each other constantly, often about things that have nothing to do with their professional lives or mutual friends. Jake still remembers details about Emma's life and preferences that seem inappropriately intimate for a friendship. He goes out of his way to support her photography career in ways that go beyond normal friendship, and he always seems to prioritize her needs and requests over mine when there's a conflict. Most importantly, Jake's reaction to my concerns about that dinner has been completely dismissive and defensive. Instead of trying to understand why the experience was so hurtful to me, he's focused on defending Emma and her family. He's made it clear that he values their opinions and feelings more than mine, and he's unwilling to set any boundaries with Emma to protect our marriage. I confronted Emma directly about a week after the dinner, asking her if the photography session had been a genuine professional opportunity or just an excuse to orchestrate that family gathering. She seemed surprised by my directness but eventually admitted that her family had been curious about meeting me and learning more about Jake's current life. She claimed she hadn't intended for the evening to become so focused on her and Jake's past relationship, but she also didn't apologize for how uncomfortable it had made me. Emma also made some comments that made it clear she doesn't respect the boundaries of our marriage. She said something about how she and Jake have a special connection that transcends typical friendship, and how she hopes I can understand and accept that their bond will always be important to both of them. She basically told me that I need to accept that Jake will always have feelings for her, and that trying to interfere with their friendship would only push him away from me. I'm now at a crossroads in my marriage. I don't think I can continue in a relationship where my husband prioritizes his ex-girlfriend's feelings over mine, where I'm expected to tolerate being humiliated and disrespected, and where I'm made to feel like the villain for having reasonable boundaries about what's appropriate in a marriage. Jake still doesn't think he did anything wrong by allowing Emma's family to spend hours telling me how perfect he and Emma were together. He doesn't understand why I'm upset about him participating in conversations that essentially dismissed our marriage as inferior to his past relationship with Emma. He thinks I'm being jealous and controlling for asking him to set clearer boundaries with Emma. And he's made it clear that he's not willing to sacrifice their friendship to make me more comfortable. I've started seeing a therapist to help me work through my feelings about all of this. She's helped me understand that what happened at that dinner was a form of emotional abuse, and that Jake's refusal to acknowledge how inappropriate it was is itself a serious problem. She's also helped me recognize patterns in our relationship where Jake consistently prioritizes Emma's needs and feelings over mine, and where I've been made to feel guilty for having normal expectations about marriage and fidelity. I'm honestly considering divorce at this point. I don't think I can stay married to someone who allows me to be treated so disrespectfully, especially when that someone is his ex-girlfriend who clearly still has feelings for him. I deserve a partner who prioritizes our marriage, who protects me from situations like that dinner, and who is willing to set appropriate boundaries with other people to preserve our relationship. The hardest part is that I genuinely loved Jake and believed we had a strong marriage. But this situation has opened my eyes to problems that have been there all along. I just don't know if they're fixable, or if Jake is even willing to acknowledge that they exist. Right now, I'm taking things one day at a time while I figure out what I want my future to look like.